Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here, continuing our march to the Big Ten. Today we return to the traditional Big Ten teams with number 16, the Northwestern Wildcats. Last year, Chris Collins' crew was in the NCAA tournament, but Rod here doesn't think that's in the cards for this year. A reminder that each year, Rod will offer his prognostication for the final standings of the Big Ten, spots 1 through 18. This also means that you also have the opportunity to beat Rod in our Beat Rod Challenge. See if you are better at predicting than Rod. The winner gets $100 in free apparel from our great Spartan sponsor, Nudge Printing. Send along your entries to Eric at tffinots.com. That's 1 through 18, with the tiebreaker being how many points Michigan State scores against Michigan this season. And as a reminder, they play twice. All right, so talking about the Wildcats, it's going to be a good test for Chris Collins. He's now without his guard Buie, who's played, I think, 27 seasons for the Wildcats. He was almost irrationally feared by all Spartan fans, although, he did have a number of good games, but he's almost like Superman by most Spartan fans seem to place him. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with Northwestern as I don't know if it's a rebuilding year, but it's certainly going to be a different team than it's been in the past few.
Yeah. Look, Northwestern's made the NCAA tournament 3 times in program history. 2 of those came in the last 2 seasons. And all
right.
all three under Collins. So that says something about both him as a coach and also where they've been the last couple of years. By program standards, this is the golden age for Northwestern basketball. 22-12. They were 12-8 in the league, beat Florida Atlantic when they got into the tournament before they eventually fell to champion UConn in a second round game. Very solid defensive team, but they were actually much better last season on the offensive end. 35th most efficient offense in the nation, and that's by far the best finish of the Collins era. So what they did really well, they valued the ball well, which is something his teams have generally done. And then they did something his teams generally have not done extremely well, which is shoot the 3.
Yeah.
They were really dangerous. And that's where a guy like Buie was a factor, of course, but he wasn't alone. So as you say, this coming season is going to be a good test for Collins. We talked during the off season when the coaching carousel got going as to whether it made sense for Collins to leave. There was talk of him perhaps being a candidate in a few places. I think his name was mentioned early at Michigan. I don't think that ever seemed to have any real truth to it, but I certainly was of the mind that if you were Chris Collins, last off season was really the time to make your decision as to where you wanted your career to finish out.
Right.
Which is funny to say because it's not as if he's ancient. I think he's maybe just recently gotten into his 50s, I think. So he's potentially is a long way to go. But Northwestern, as we said, not a long track record of success. So it's possible that he won't be back to the NCAA tournament for a while. And if he had any thoughts about perhaps having a chance to reach Final Fours, contend for national title, that kind of thing, that it would be possible that he would decide, well, I've done everything I can do at a place like Northwestern,
Yeah.
He didn't opt to do that. He opted to stay. And I think what that probably says, there's no guarantees, things can change, but my thought at this stage now is that it indicates he's a lifer in that job. That he probably is not looking to move from Evanston, because if he was coming off 2 straight tournament years in that program, would have been the time to leverage up. And
For
he
sure.
didn't do that. Maybe it would have been different if the job at his alma mater, Duke, was potentially there for him, but it seems that door is closed for good, most likely. John Shire is very young, doesn't look likely to be leaving anytime soon. So, yeah, that might be a factor, but I still thought it was possible he might look to trade up. And the fact that he didn't do it, in a sense, good for him. That he's decided, hey, I built this thing and I'm an institution, or on my way to being that in this job, and I want to see that through. So, you have to admire it at a certain level.
Sure. And, Northwestern, we mentioned Pat Fitzgerald was sort of in the similar situation as the football coach
Absolutely.
there, aside from the weird sort of controversy that forced him to have to leave. But at this point for Collins, it has to be, I think, probably a super high profile job, or something happens at university, or, maybe the NBA comes calling. I'm trying to think of sort of situations where that would happen. And I guess that's one question. I don't have a good feel for that now. Is the pay that much better in the NBA? I mean, certainly the life expectancy of a coach in the NBA is much lower than it is in college basketball, able to stay in a program, because you're usually not taking over a team that's any good. So it seems like it's a bit riskier to go to the NBA. And I don't know, is it paid that much more lucrative at this point?
I think it depends. I still think for the most part, the answer would be yes, I think. But it depends. If you're the head coach, if you're John Calipari, Tom Izzo, you can certainly make money that's comparable or better than a lot of NBA jobs. But,
yeah.
I think, if I remember correctly, I think the numbers that the Lakers were talking about when they were trying to hire Danny Hurley, I think it was a pay bump, but it wasn't a ton.
Yeah.
So it really depends. Somebody like Collins, yeah. But you never hear him mentioned as an NBA guy, which is interesting, because his father, of course, was a long time, pretty highly regarded NBA head coach. And, Chris obviously has a different background. He never played in the NBA, unlike his dad. And I don't think he has spent a day coaching at that level. So that might be why, but it is interesting that you never hear his name.
Yeah, I've always wanted that too, because his dad had that history. However,
right.
It is, once you've seen your parents go through something, you may say, that's just not the life I want. And that could also influence his decision to stay at Northwestern versus go to some higher profile program where the pressure is greater and, the expectation to succeed every season. Like Tom Izzo gets raked over the coals for having a season where he's, 18 and 12 or something. Whereas Northwestern, you can do that 5 years in a row and you're probably okay.
Oh, probably. I mean, he's... Yeah. Again, he hasn't been a lot better than what you just said the last 2 years, which are 2 of the 3 best seasons in Northwestern history.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, that's definitely the case that, you can look at it. And I've heard different things that, Collins is supposedly not necessarily a beloved figure within the administration over there. He's kind of tough to deal with. That's not how he comes across publicly. but I've heard that. I don't know what level of truth there is to that. But obviously he feels very secure in that job, and rightly so, because I before the last 2 years, I thought it was possible that despite his having been the guy who broke the seal on the tournament for Northwestern, they might be ready to part ways, because he had that one season and then several years in a row, which we've talked about here, where despite improved recruiting, better talent on paper, they didn't seem to be taking that next step, or even repeating the step that they had taken once. So you wondered about that. But now that he's done this the last 2 years, I just really struggle with the idea that Northwestern would look to get rid of him anytime soon. I think he's as secure probably as anybody in the Big Ten outside of Tom Izzo and Matt Painter at the moment. That's how I would probably be inclined to view it.
Yeah. And I think the alumni base is obviously not large. It's probably, I think it's the smallest school in the Big Ten from an alumni standpoint. Probably fairly successful, probably have a decent amount of money, not enough to make a huge impact through an NIL or things like that. But I think to the point is that I think they're probably fairly influential-ish people. And to try and remove someone who's been successful getting a couple NCAA tournament wins, I can't imagine the situation where that would happen.
But you make an interesting point, though. Now, there's no real evidence that Northwestern has flexed money on going out and getting high-profile guys in the portal. They've landed guys, but they're not having these moments where they're paying $1 million for somebody. But what's interesting is, at least thus far, I don't think they've gone through. Well, I should amend that. The first season, the portal really got cranking. They took a hit where they lost a couple starters. But I didn't get the sense that those were situations. I could be wrong about this, but I don't recall hearing that, those guys would have come back, but they just couldn't turn down the checks from Duke and North Carolina. I got the sense it was those guys wanted to play at places where they had a chance to win big and play at a higher profile place. Since then, they haven't lost guys.
No.
They've got guys this year that I think if they, somebody like Brooks Barnheiser, if he'd hit the portal, he absolutely would have had suitors, big time suitors. And they're not really losing guys. Now, whether that's just because at a place like Northwestern, they're managing to get guys who view it through a little bit of a different lens, or whether it means the financial support is there to retain their players. It's probably some of both, but I do think that's interesting that at least as of yet, they haven't been hit by just mass defections the way you might wonder about if you were at a place where NIL was an issue.
Yeah. Well, I do get the impression.
Like Minnesota, for example.
Right.
They haven't suffered anything close to what Minnesota has gone through.
Well, there are plenty of teams. Illinois has the same problem. They're programs that just tend to have a lot of, efflux and influx. And, that is, I think, a testament a little bit to the coaching staff and reflection of Chris Collins and ability to re-recruiting. Because, there's always a joke that, you used to, after the season, you'd go down and try and find, go on recruiting trips. Right now, you see the coaching staff stick around for a while in lots of these programs in order just to maintain those relationships. How are you doing? And I think Izzo's always tried an emphasis on that. But I think even more so recently, just because there's, the flight threat is real.
You want to talk about a big, and I read this last year, a big sea change in college coaching. People talk about attendance from coaches being way down at high school AAU events in the spring, which is true. Mm-hmm. Because high school recruiting has diminished in importance. But you know what else has changed? It's always been the case that the Final Four was essentially the de facto college coaches convention. That's where all coaches went. You went if you were looking to get a job. You went if You were out of a job and maybe looking to get hired, all of those things. I had read that attendance was way down the last couple of years, especially this year, though, for exactly the reason you just suggested, because we've got this scenario where the portal kicks in prior to that.
Yeah.
So by the time the Final Four, or a few weeks prior, so by the time the Final Four rolls around, coaches are absolutely in full protection mode with their own rosters. They have to be.
Yeah. And recruit, and they're probably, in the extension of that, is just looking for transfer players too, right? It's not
That
just
too.
retention. Yeah, you almost begun the college recruitment part.
It's both sides. It's you're re-recruiting your own guys, and you also need to be available to bring in other guys from other schools that you might want to add. Absolutely. Yeah. It's both things.
Well, let's talk about the Wildcats then. We'll talk about the players departing, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, as Northwestern did not clean house like a lot of these other schools have. They've only had a very small amount of people departing their program. Again, the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, fantastic service. Need your windows cleaned. I'm actually staring out a really, really dirty window right now at my cottage, and think, man, I wish they were up here. They will clean meticulously the inside, the outside of your windows, get rid of all the spider webs, clean out the screens and all the stuff that you never like to do yourself. Windowsills. They also can power wash your house. So if you just want to change your house is gray and it turns out it's actually not gray, at some time it was a different color, that they can take care of that too. So great pricing, 15% off. You mentioned Final Four. You can find ways to get an estimate at our support page at tifionots.com/support. So we'll begin with the most famous of the Northwestern Wildcats, Buie, a great name, and he has been certainly the most successful player in Wildcats history because he has more NCAA wins than any other player in the history, I'm sure, because he has some. And he was, let's see, so he played a fifth year with the COVID year. He also averaged 19 points a game last season, shot 44, 43, 86, 5 to 2.3 assist to turnover margin. And, obviously team leader. Defensively, he was really good. And he was a guy who, especially the end of the game, if you needed a shot or needed a bucket, he's the guy there's no question. He's the guy you're going to go to. And he was a winner.
Yeah, and it says a lot about Northwestern's program and its history or lack thereof that you're talking about a guy who just left in 2024 as maybe the greatest player in program history. If you think about that, we don't have that discussion very often. Interestingly, we probably would have to say that also about a guy at Purdue in Zach Edey.
Yeah.
But rarely are we in that position. It's you think of when your mind turns to those kind of names, they tend to be guys from further back in history, most places. We know who it is at Michigan State. At Michigan, you're probably arguing between guys like Cassie Russell, Glenn Rice, maybe Chris Webber. All those guys are, 30 years or more since they played, and on and on and on. That would be the case at most programs in the league. But at Northwestern, I think there's really a credible case that guy is Buie. 2 straight tournament years. He really benefited from COVID, obviously, because last season would not have been there for anybody else or many other guys in the history of the program to truly play 5 years. And he took advantage. You could see the difference. I mean, he was a mature player who was really ready to capitalize on that extra season. And he did so. As you mentioned, you can look at the stats with him and they tell you a lot, but the eye test, he also passed with flying colors because there were few, if any, guys you were more afraid of with the ball in their hands in a tight situation and the clock running down than Buie in the Big Ten in recent years. And that's just a testament to the kind of poise he tended to play with in those big moments. So, yeah, an impossible guy for them to replace with just one player. It's going to have to be by committee because they don't have anybody who's got the total makeup that he had.
Yeah, I think, and even look at those stats, he shot 43% from 3, but I think one of the real impressive things is from even like 2 years ago, shot selection totally changed. His efficiency really improved a ton. And so he's a guy you'd almost joke about how sort of, he could get hot and burn you, which he had done once or twice, maybe at Michigan State early in his career, but he was just a solid player near the end there. So
that's what I mean about being ready to take advantage of that fifth year.
Yeah, right.
The maturity in his game really showed through last season. And you're absolutely right. Shot selection may be the single biggest improvement he had.
So another departing player was Ryan Langborg. He was played them for years, 6'4" transfer from Princeton, and he's exactly what they needed to replace Chase Audige. He was able to score well. He averaged 12.7 points a game, shot 44, 42, and 77. He missed one of the games against Michigan State where they beat Northwestern, so I think that was part of the reason Michigan State beat Northwestern. So again, he's another big piece that they're going to have to try and fill for next season.
Absolutely. Northwestern's strength the last 2 years, what got them over the hump was the caliber of their guard play. And as I noted at the outset, the equation changed between those 2 seasons a little bit. 2 years ago, it was really keyed by their backcourt defense. Chase Audige was a huge part of that because he was a long 6'4", great wingspan. It was just a great defensive presence. And Northwestern was a very disruptive team to try to play against. Last year, with Audige gone, they bring in Langborg, and what changed is they became much, much better offensively. They're still good defensively, not as good, because Langborg was not as good a defender as Audige, but what he was a much more consistent and dangerous offensive player than Audige had been. And you see the shooting numbers, they were great. He was exactly what they needed. So great job in the portal by Chris Collins, bringing in a guy from the Ivy League who was, not seen as a superstar addition, but boy, he played very, very well.
Yeah, you just never, we talk about it all the time. You never know when you bring guys up from sort of smaller conferences if they're going to be able to perform at the level they were before, or sometimes even as a complimentary piece. That's the tricky thing too. You could be the star player at Yale or something like that, and you may do really, really well because you're always getting double team. You just don't know those sorts of things, sort of when people are defending you back in that conference.
Yes.
Final departure is Blake Preston, 6'9", transfer forward. Didn't do much last year. He just scored 2 points a game, 2 rebounds a game in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, he was a big body. They also added through the portal that didn't have to produce a lot for them, and he did.
The depth piece they didn't actually need, so that's
right.
Then we'll move on to returning players, and probably one of the most important ones is Ty Berry. He decided to stick around for his COVID year, so thankfully this is the last of the COVID years for the college basketball. And he's had problems with injuries, but he's been very productive. 6'3" guard, scored 11.6 points a game on 45, 43, and 90 shooting. And so, there's every reason to expect that shooting he'll bring with him this year, and which is something he'll definitely need.
Yeah, his health is a very, very big deal now. Again, something we didn't mention, the other reason you really have to credit what they did as a team last year is Berry got hurt down the stretch.
Yeah, and Langborg.
It was not Langborg a little bit.
Yeah.
But Berry was done, period.
Yeah, right.
And didn't play down the stretch of the regular season and then in the postseason. So, winning that tournament game was without him, who was one of their better players. And getting enough wins down the stretch of the regular season to cement tournament bid was done without him. So that was a real credit to the team for this year, because he was having the best year of his career.
And he was really playing well at the very end, right when he got injured, too.
Yes.
He's really tearing it up.
11.6 points a game, 45, 43, 90 shooting. That's by far the best performance of his Northwestern career. Very good defensive player. And now you bring him back for a fifth year, but to a team that's lost the other 2 starters at the guard spots. It's critical that Ty Berry is at least what he was last season before he tore his meniscus. So they're expecting the healing to be complete. It needs to be. and he needs to be the same guy he was last year before that or better. I'd also expect his role to change a little bit. When you look at Northwestern's roster, it seems likely to me that he's going to spend a lot more time on the ball than he has before. Now, the last time Northwestern had to go through this, it was a couple of years ago, and they moved Buie, who had played more off the ball his first couple of years. They moved him to the point sort of out of necessity. I, at the time, was not convinced that was a great move because my feeling about him, as we were just talking about, is that his decision-making was kind of erratic. But he really developed into a true high-caliber point guard. There's no question about that. They need Ty Berry to do something roughly similar.
Next would be Brooks Barnheiser, 6'7" forward. Really like this player outside of his bad mustache. He made a huge leap as a junior. People will obviously remember that game in Evanston where he just schooled Malik Hall. He averaged 14.6 points a game, 7.5 rebounds a game on 43, 35, and 77 shooting, and was solid for. So, I mean, despite losing Buie and Langborg, they have some pieces that are really good coming back, and he's definitely one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mentioned it a few minutes ago. If a guy like Barnheiser had hit the market, he would have had huge interest, I think, because he proved last season he's an all-conference caliber player. And he's done what you hope guys do at a place like Northwestern, where you're not tending to get McDonald's All-Americans. You're not getting the instant impact guys. What you hope for is that you've identified the right players and that they're guys who will steadily get better over the course of their careers. And, of course, you hope they are able to retain them over their careers so that development happens for you and not somebody else. Well, all that's come true with Barnheiser. He's gotten steadily better. Last season as a junior, as you mentioned, the numbers were great. And they're even better in a sense than they look on the surface because he struggled shooting the three early. He got to 35% on the back of being really good down the stretch in Big Ten play. So you're talking about a guy who comes into this season, I think, pretty clearly identified as their best player and a guy who can score in a variety of ways. He understands what Collins needs because he's a fourth-year player. He's played a ton of minutes for them by this point. Just a really nice piece to have coming back. Absolutely. The question mark with him, I think, is now that I think it'll be he and Barry that'll be 1 and 1A in terms of their roles in the offense, but he hasn't been in that position before. Even though the scoring numbers were good last year, he wasn't ever the focal point of opposing scouting reports. He probably is going to be this year. So you always have to wonder, how does a guy make that transition to the top of the scouting report? Does it go smoothly, or does that mean that they struggle now that opponents can zero in on them a little bit more? It remains to be seen, but I think Barnheiser's going to have an excellent final season. That's what I expect.
It would not shock you, outside the fact that I think Northwestern will have a great team record, to see him on first team or all Big Ten team. That's entirely
somewhere somewhere in there. Yes.
His backup, Nick Martinelli, is coming back, 6'7" junior. He averaged 8.8 points a game, 4.1 rebounds a game. Shot 49, 27 to 78. So obviously his big problem is a 3-point shot, but he had brought a lot of energy, and I think he was a pretty good backup player.
Well, he didn't stay a backup. When Barry got hurt, he moved into the starting lineup, and I've looked at Martinelli. He's a similar size to Barnheiser, and to me, thus far, he's been on a similar path. He went from freshman year where he didn't do a lot, same thing with Barnheiser, and then as a sophomore, Barnheiser emerged as a legitimate rotation guy. Well, that happened to Martinelli last year. And the question is, can Martinelli make that jump that Barnheiser made as a junior into not just a rotation guy, but a starter and a key player? And he's on the right path. Now, the 3-point shooting has to improve. But again, that was a problem for Barnheiser earlier, and it developed into last year into something that was sort of a strength. Can Martinelli do the same thing? I actually think Martinelli may be even better than Barnheiser around the rim. He's a very good post player for a guy who's not center sized. He's very clever. He knows how to use his body to create space. He seems to finish well. If he can add a little bit to his jumper, I think he has every chance to be a really, really good player.
Then we'll go to Matt Nicholson, 7 foot, fifth-year senior center. He averaged 5.3 points a game, 4.3 rebounds a game, 1.5 blocks a game. And he's a guy we weren't even sure was going to emerge as a starting center a couple years ago. I think he's from Clarkson, right?
Yes.
And he obviously showed that he was very capable. He got injured at the end of the last season as well, but it seemed with, I think, a foot injury, which shockingly happened to a non-Michigan State player.
That was another guy they were missing for that tournament experience. Yeah. Makes it even more remarkable they ended Dusty May's Florida Atlantic tenure. Look, Nicholson, he pretty clearly is and isn't certain things. What he's not is a guy who just kind of backs people down to the post and you can go to get post up buckets, when you need them. Certainly not a face up threat offensively. Highly unlikely to ever be a consistent double-digit scorer. I'd be surprised if he even averaged 10 points a game this year. That's not what he is. But the things he does well, he does very well. And there's subtle things, screening. He's a big body. He's really filled out this time at Northwestern. He's not just 7 feet. He's big.
Yeah.
And that'll be more noticeable this year now that we don't have Zach Edey dwarfing everybody and making legitimately big people not look as big as they are. You'll notice it more this year with Matt Nicholson probably. Very good defensive player. He's good for a big kid. He's very good in pick and roll game. He obviously takes up space down low and just understands what Collins needs from him. I think which sounds like a backhanded compliment, but it's really not. Good teams need guys like Matt Nicholson that have a role, might not be a glamorous one, might not even be one where a lot of stuff shows up easily on the stat sheet, but you still need those guys to execute their roles, and I think he does that.
Then we have Luke Hunger, 6'10", sophomore, averaged 3.8 points a game, 2.1 rebounds a game in about 13 minutes. He shot 45, 20, and 68. So a guy who, at the 5 spot, expectation is he's going to get better and might be, somebody who scores a little bit better than Nicholson.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. Nicholson is not a guy who's going to play 35 minutes.
Right.
So they need Hunger to continue to develop into that second part of the tandem at the 5. And they like his offensive potential a lot. I think they felt like last year was just scratching the surface. They think he can legitimately stretch defenses, that he's got the potential to be a 30% plus shooter from 3. He can score a little in the post. He's definitely more skilled than Nicholson is. Maybe he's not as big, and maybe, although he's big, he's not as big, and not yet as reliable in some of those intangible areas I was just alluding to. But again, could be a good part of a 2-man tandem at that spot this year.
Next will be Jordan Clayton, 6'2", sophomore, played 28 games, averaged 7 minutes a game. Didn't really produce a whole lot, and so I guess the question will be, can he add a little bit more this season?
Yeah, look, Northwestern has needs in the backcourt, obviously, with 2 of the 3 starters gone and the guy who's coming back coming off of meniscus. So there's a chance for these next few guys we're going to talk about, none of whom played big roles last year. Clayton, again, 7 minutes a game, didn't produce, but it's a new year and a new opportunity, so we'll see if he happens to be someone that emerges.
Blake Smith, 6'6", sophomore, and I believe he was a walk-on when he came and really emerged as a mini star sort of last year, especially once Ty Berry got hurt. He came in and ended up even starting a couple games. He averaged 2.4 points a game on 64, 33, and 61 shooting. played hard and, just contributed in lots of little ways too for a freshman. Is very impressive.
Yeah. And again, with a couple positions more than that, really, because it's not even just the starting spots. It's also rotation spots that are open. Every opportunity for Blake Smith to build on that. You're right. When he finally got a chance out of necessity, he actually produced in the way some scholarship guys weren't able to. So we'll see if he can build on that.
Then we have Justin Mullins. He's a 6'4" senior, transferred in from Denver, played 19 games, but not much. He averaged a little less than half a point a game. So, again, the question whether he's going to contribute much this season.
Yeah, they need somebody to step up. I think they were disappointed he wasn't able to do more after coming over in the portal last year. We'll see if that changes. Yeah,
and he's just an example of, you bring someone from a conference with Denver.
Yep.
You may hit him, hit on him, and you might, if someone doesn't hit, you just don't know. Finally, Blake Barkley, 6'7" forward, redshirted last year as a freshman, so he'll have 4 years of eligibility remaining now that people care about redshirts again.
Yeah, and, we didn't get any indication, because he didn't play, as to what he might be capable of doing. But I think their hope is that he's a guy that fits into that Barnheiser, Martinelli mold where that he gradually comes along. He's a similar size. They think he's got similar versatility in his game, but we just haven't seen any indication. And again, with some of these guys that Northwestern brings in, you're not talking about highly decorated high school players. So you don't even have that much to go on and say, well, this is a guy that was offered by all these other high majors and he was ranked in the top 100. So you can't really make those assumptions other than maybe giving some benefit of the doubt to Collins's eye for talent. That's really it. So we'll see.
Then move on to the newcomers for the Wildcats this year, brought to you by Nudge Printing, who also has all kinds of new products come online all the time. And so you want to make sure you check it out at the Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. I'd also recommend you sign up for their email list. They have specials. They run all the time on Mother's Day, Father's Day, Independence Day, sort of whenever they can get an excuse to offer a discount. The Nudge Printing guys, fantastic stuff. Vintage Spartan stuff. They also have other schools. They even have Indiana Hoosiers. So if you need apparel, whether it's a hoodie, a t-shirt, or even some wall stickers, they got it all for you. So you check out Nudge Printing and they do great work. So the first newcomer would be Jalen Leach, 6'4", grad transfer from Fairfield. He is averaging 16.2 points a game last season on 49, 35, and 90 shooting, along with 3 assists a game.
They need this to be right in terms of, identifying a guy in the portal who can come in and help them immediately at a guard spot, as we've talked about. That's where the need is on this roster. They're pretty good at the forward spots. They look solid at center. And Barry's got one guard spot nailed down, but they really need help elsewhere. And so a guy like Leach probably needs to be able to step in and contribute as a starter. If he struggles, I think it's going to be tough, because that means then those guys who didn't do much last season in Northwestern really have to be much improved. Our guy makes the leap from Fairfield to Northwestern. Open question. You talked about it with Langford. He moved up from the Ivy and was really good. Will they be that fortunate again? You don't know, but what you have to default to is, okay, Chris Collins has managed to identify guys in the past who've been able to make that jump. If they're going to be anything close to what they've been the last couple of years, Leach needs to be that kind of player. I think the expectation is that he'll play both on and off the ball. So if he can take some of the point guard duties off of Barry's plate, that's a positive. He shot 35% from 3 last year. That's okay. They'd like him to be better than that. They could use him to be better than that. And they need scoring from the guard spots regardless. So there's a lot of pressure on Leach to come in, not just be a part. He needs to be a productive guy.
We'll follow with 7-foot transfer from Stony Brook, Keenan Fitzmaurice. He started his career over at Stanford. He averaged 11 points a game and 4.4 rebounds a game, shooting 51, 33, and 77. So I think, not only will he provide that interior depth to Nicholson, but you could almost imagine a scenario where he provides the ability for maybe Luke Hunger to move over to the 4, Bernhardt to the 3 or something. I mean, it gives you a little more versatility in lineups and matchups.
Yep. I think you're right about that. The difference with Fitzmaurice and a guy like Leach is that Fitzmaurice, even though he came from Stony Brook, he actually started his career at Stanford. So he has seen the high major level before. Yeah. And size and experience, those are two things that you can never have quite enough of. I don't know how big a role he's going to play, but I suspect you're right. That at least opens up the possibility that they could move Hunger to more of a 4 spot, especially if he does demonstrate an improved shooting touch. And Fitzmaurice could eat up some of the backup 5 minutes.
Yeah, they can have a pretty big lineup in there. You have a 7-footer and a 6'10" player. Yeah, interesting coming from Stanford, traditional Atlantic Coast Conference powerhouse. Moving on to KJ Wyndham. He's a 6'2" combo guard out of Indianapolis. Not really recruited highly at the high major level, but we'll see what happens. Maybe a strike gold again here for Collins.
Yeah, I actually like this ad because I know a little bit about Wyndham. He's from Indianapolis and he played. He was very successful as a high school player. Played well in AAU. They didn't have to beat out a bunch of other high majors to get him, but that was the case with Buie. That was the case with Bryant McIntosh, who was the point guard on their previous tournament team. Wyndham, I think, could be a guy potentially who ends up in that mold. And I actually, given their guard situation, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's able to actually play a significant role as a freshman. If he's capable of doing that, especially if he's capable of playing some point, it will really help their overall situation because it'll take some responsibility off of older guys who can then maybe focus a little more on scoring.
The final newcomer is Angelo Schiavino, 6'5" freshman from Chicago. Actually recruiting in town for once for Northwestern.
Yeah, they like him. Good size on the wing, high energy player. They think he's got some good athleticism. His ball skills are developing. Again, with younger Northwestern players, because they're not guys who tend to come in with top 100 kind of accolades, it's hard sometimes to know which of the guys they've brought in are likely to break through. But I think there's a chance here because, again, Northwestern needs bodies in the backcourt. They need guys who can play. So he might be capable of helping as a true freshman. We don't know.
Well, my dad is up here, up north, and he has all kinds of problems with water in his crawl space for years. Now, he lives on the lake, so, some part of it is the fact that the water table is really high. But he finally had someone put in a gutter, and it is amazing what a difference it made. Suddenly the water's washing away from the foundation, and now his crawl space is dry. He used to have like a million fans down there blowing all the time. It was really kind of crazy, the sort of the contraptions and things he tried to do, where all he had to do is just put a gutter in. So maybe you have that problem. If you do, the Brothers Who Adjust Your Gutters are the ones to call. Whether it's your business, whether it's your home, just maybe one section of gutter, maybe the whole things need to be replaced or just repaired, cleaned out, whatever it is, the Brothers Who Adjust Your Gutters can do that job. If you're on the east side or the west side of the state, they got you covered. You get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you go to get an estimate. You can find ways to contact Kurt or Greg at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support at our support page. And they sponsor the player that teams will need to keep in the gutter. And so I'm kind of interested in what you think will be the player that most teams need to keep in the gutter this season for Northwestern.
Well, it's between two guys, I think.
Right,
it's
yeah.
Barnhizer or Barry. I'm going to go with Barnhizer. Just because I think there's not the question of coming back from an injury.
Sure.
But both guys, I don't feel ultra confident in that because Barry will have the ball in his hands a lot, and I could see a scenario where he emerges as their best player, but I'll go with Barnhizer.
Yeah, and Barnheiser certainly is more versatile too. He might be more of a problem trying to stop too, just because he can probably score at different levels on you. All right. So moving on to Northwestern, just overall impression. We have them ranked here as 16th, so third from last. We put Northwestern there before, and I think they ended up like in second or third in the league that one year, a couple years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah. So you just never know. I mean, like with many of these teams, if the pieces start fitting, and we've seen a guy with Collins who manages to pull off. I mean, they beat Purdue back-to-back seasons. Not many teams in the Big Ten can say that. Can he recover without Buie? Was that what was carrying the team, or is this more like, is this something Collins can overcome? I guess, that's the real question going into this season.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that it started to go a little different direction. I've been talking about how it's hard sometimes to project younger players at Northwestern because they're not coming in with as much in the way of profile as they do in other Big Ten programs. So you can't say, well, yeah, it's pretty obvious that player X should get a chance as a freshman because there are minutes available and he was a top 50 recruit. They don't have guys like that in this class. Right. They really haven't for a while. What's interesting to me is that after that first tournament season, you could clearly see what Collins was doing. And he started to add guys who were top 100 recruits and who did have multiple other high major offers. When he had Nance, when he had Pete Nance, for example, Pete Nance had offers from John Beeline's Michigan, from Ohio State. He had a bunch of other higher level Big Ten offers, and he chose Northwestern. I'm drawing a blank on the kid, the guy from Texas who played at Northwestern for a while and then transferred to Indiana that was a shooter. Shooting forward.
Cobb.
Yes, Miller Kopp, exactly.
Yeah.
Same deal. Had offers from good high major programs. It looked to me like, all right, Chris Collins is trying to leverage that season of success and really elevate the kind of talent that he's able to get. And he was able to do that successfully, at least in terms of signing guys like that for a while. But it wasn't working. It wasn't, and I'm not saying that those guys those were good players and they did some good things at Northwestern, but the bottom line is the teams were not able to build on that tournament success. And it was only when some of those guys left and he was back to what on paper looked like a less talented, quote unquote, group that he was able to break through again. And so you look at this team now and it doesn't have a lot of guys who were headline recruits. It doesn't have anybody who fit that mold, honestly. But it may be that he's found a comfort level that he feels like he's gotten to a point that he can identify the kind of player that's going to work in his system, and it doesn't really matter where those guys are ranked. And I don't, I'm working from conjecture on some of this, but that's how it looks to me. I've got him 16th because, as we keep saying, somebody's got to finish in these spots. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that this could be a tournament team again. There's enough here to suggest that that's possible. I think it's a lower percentage chance, though, because it's hard to win in college basketball without your guard play being really good, and they've just got questions there. Now, they have potential answers. If their transfer from Fairfield, Leach, is really good, if Wyndham is able to contribute as a freshman, if one of the several guys they're bringing back who didn't do much last season, like Blake Smith or some of the other guys, emerges, and if Ty Berry's healthy, then yeah, maybe it happens. If that does happen, if they get good guard play, I'd say they have a great chance to be a tournament team because the other positions, I think they're in really good shape. We've talked about how good Barnheiser is, and I think Martinelli is ready to continue to progress. And I like their center spot to be at least respectable, functional. So it really does come down to the guards. I think they're not going to be quite good enough to get over the hump again. and make it 3 straight years, but I don't rule it out. And if they are able to do that, boy, it would really start to get you believing that maybe Chris Collins has honestly got a program now rather than a place where occasionally he's able to cycle up and do some winning.
Yeah, he is. I mean, it's a very small sample size, but you almost can envision this is a very good developmental program that's able to retain their players, and not a developmental program that gets someone up and then they transfer out to somewhere else. And so if he can maintain that somehow, right, that's the tough part.
Yeah, it's keeping, when you look at it, it's keeping, like for next year, for example, Barnheiser will be done, but Martinelli would have 1 more year of eligibility. So it's going to be key that they retain Martinelli and that they get a senior year out of him, but thus far, he's been able to do better than okay in that regard. That needs to continue because that's definitely the path that he's on. When you're bringing in the kind of freshman that he's bringing in, when I look at a guy like Wyndham, that's a guy to me I could see what the thought process is. It's all right. You bring him in, he plays a little bit as a freshman, gets his feet wet. As a sophomore, he's able to really contribute. And then as a junior and senior, maybe we get a star or at least a starter out of him. But that only works if you keep those guys around.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, thanks to everyone for listening, and make sure if you like the show, please leave a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. If you leave a written review, it's even better. We really appreciate that. That helps other Spartans find the show on their algorithms. Also, if you appreciate the show, please continue supporting the show, not only by listening and sharing it, but also drop us a couple shekels. You can head on over to the support page, find ways to give one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo, or recurring gifts on Patreon or Substack. So until next time, in the number 15 team, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.